Hello there, I'm your host Dan Rojas. In this video I'm going to be showing you the process that I use to make this mirror array that we use for Nippon television to cook food using regular lighting. I'm also going to be showing you a link where I demonstrate how to properly frame something. This will work for artwork, it'll work for mirrors, it'll work for Fresnel lenses, just about anything. It gives you a very nice finish and it only takes a couple minutes to do. We're going to be making a solar cooker using a regular terracotta flower pot and 8 mirrors like this. The base is going to be this wooden structure that we have, and it works really well. The one thing that you want to keep in mind is that this is a heavier solar cooker, so it's something for your backyard. You may not want to take this with you camping or to the tailgate party unless you have a pretty good sized truck. The first thing that I did was get a flower pot. This is a large 16, almost 17-inch terracotta pot. I spray painted the outside black. I use this turntable that we made using the circle cut method. You want to put gloss black on first because it covers a lot better. So you don't use as much of this. Then you go over it with the light mist of the matte black. If you try to just use the matte black on this, you're going to use 3 or 4 cans. This was covered with a half a can of gloss black and maybe a 1/10 of a can of the matte black. You do not want to spray the inside because we're not going to be doing the traditional solar cooking method. Terracotta cooking has been around for a while. You actually can put water in there and it creates like a steam effect. We're going to get started on the base for this that holds the mirrors in place and also holds this. I'm going to be showing you a lot of methods that I use to cut wood. I rip 2x4s on a daily basis as part of our business. We have framed over 7,000 things in the past 4 years. One of the things you want to make sure of, I've mentioned this in previous videos, get a straight 2x4. Make sure that it doesn't have any curves to it when you do these projects because the curves are actually what causes the wood to pinch the blade and kick back. I'm going to be letting this wood go and sit on the saw by itself. This is different than what a lot of woodworking experts will tell you. The reason that I do that, I see a lot of people doing videos showing how to cut stuff using a table saw, and they'll put their fingers right near the blades. You don't want to do that. You've got a work area here on your table saw. Your hand should not go beyond the limits of the table saw. It's hard to cut yourself way out here. Easy to lose a finger right there. Once you lose a finger, it's a done thing. So you don't want to be like this. You want to definitely make sure your hands are clear. Now, behind me, there's a brick wall. There's nobody there. In the event that this 2x4 does fly back, which in all the frames that I've done, it's happened like once, there's nobody back there. And it's not going to fly at 50 miles an hour. It might just drop out. The other thing different that I do is I don't raise the blade all the way up like a lot of woodworkers do. In fact, I'm using a smaller blade. When handling the blade on a table saw, make sure you have it unplugged. That way, there's no chance of it turning on and tearing your finger off. This blade is a 7 1/4 inch blade. It is used for your standard hand saws. The reason I like this, if you raise it up just below its maximum level, it will clear a 2x4. The teeth on this are thinner. A 10-inch blade has wider teeth. A 7 1/4 inch blade has finer teeth, so you take less wood off. This equals a faster cut. This blade has done over 1,000 2x4s and I have not needed to change it. Despite what the label says, a 2x4 is not a 2x4. It is a 3.5 by 1.5. So in order to rip it perfectly in half, you need to set your saw for 1 3/4, which is half of 3.5. You have to accommodate for the loss of wood that you experience with the saw blade. So you don't want to set your guide at exactly 1 3/4. If you're using a traditional 10-inch blade on a saw, you need to set it just shy of 1 3/4. If you're using a thinner blade like I am, you can go right up just below the 1 3/4. Now there's a little trick to making sure that you're perfectly centered. Once you have your guide set where you think perfect center is, because some 2x4s actually vary just a little bit, it's a good idea. Turn your saw on. Put a little nick in it. I'm going to put a little nick in the wood. Then flip it over, and if it lines up perfectly with the saw on the other side, when you flip it, then you're right down the middle. When you work with the table saw, you want to make sure that you have a respirator mask and eye protection. The respirator mask is optional. If you do a lot of woodworking, definitely wear one of these. I wear one every day because we do a lot of woodworking. Once you have your saw set, you want to go ahead and get your cut going. Now I'm going to do something a lot of woodworkers tell you not to do. I'm going to let that piece of wood sit there and go to the other side. There's nothing behind me but a brick wall. If that wood were to fly off, there's no little kids back there, there's nothing valuable, it's not going to break anything. My hands are nowhere near the blade. In my opinion, this is much safer to do. If you pick a nice, straight piece of wood, it's not going to pinch the blade and fly back at you. If you have a second person to help you, and you can have them on the other side, make sure they stay away from the saw part. We now have a 2x4 that is split perfectly in half. One thing that is true about these 2x4s is they are 96 inches long, like they say. If you use a stud for a wall, it's going to be a little bit shorter because they're designed to stud up into other 2x4s to give you the 8-foot spread. But this one is 96 inches, so half of that is 48. We're going to cut these in half. Get this out of the way. Same rules apply to this. There are black lines here. Don't be holding your wood like that. Keep them out. Stay out of the black lines and you won't have any problem. You're going to notice those fell on me. It's a good idea to have a support on the other side. We now have 4 2x4s that are all the same length. We're going to flip them around. And what I like to do is actually just give them a little bit of a trim to freshen the edges up on the factory edge on this side because it seals the wood. Sometimes they sit for a while and the wood can actually open up there. So we're just going to take a little bit off of these. You can use this method too. Let's say that you rip these in half and they're a little bit off and you want to be as perfect as possible. That flushes everything up nicely. I have my 4 pieces of wood here, and if you notice they're 48. They're just a hair shy because I nicked a little bit off. So you want to go ahead and mark them at center. So that would be just a touch less than 24 since we took a little bit off. Since they're all lined up, I'm just going to draw a straight line across there. And you've got the center. I have the rough part turned up, the part that I actually cut on the saw. That way the smooth part is actually facing outward and you don't have to screw with the edges out there. What you do is you come over, since you know your 2x4 is exactly 1.5 inches wide that we're using, you want to come over from that center point, just a hair more than 3/4. Make sure they're all nice and straight. And you want to mark it. Come over here. We're going to go just a touch more than 3/4. And you want to mark that as well. Now when you take your piece of wood, it should fit the gap just perfectly. You notice that the black line is right on there. If you have a DADO blade for your table saw, you definitely want to use it at this point. I don't feel like changing it up. So what I've done is put this 3/4 inch backstop there. It's the right size for this saw. The saws are going to vary a little bit, but we're going to use this miter saw. I came down and also put halfway point right here. This line is just a little bit short of half of what the width of this part of the board is. This is going to vary too, so I'm not giving you measurements because if you used a wider blade, it's going to be narrower, so you just want to measure it out. keep my hands way out to the side. We're going to come down and go just to the inside of that line. And then move it over to the other black line. Go to the center. And we've cleaned that section out. It's got a little bit of a curve to it, but if you do it just right, it'll be centered. And that's all that you really need for this. You get to this point, what you want to do is see if your 2x4 slides in there. You notice how snug that is? That is a perfect fit. Doesn't twist or anything. It snugs in there perfectly. So we know that everything's right with that. We're going to go ahead and line this up, do the same thing over again. So we just cleaned out our second one. I did this in under a minute, so the guy with the DADO blade, he's still changing it. Now you get my point. So now what you have are two pieces of wood that should interlock together like this. And if you look, this one's just a touch higher, but it actually is almost perfect. If you want to be a perfectionist, you can go ahead and go deeper, just a touch. You don't have to do that, but these lock together really nice. This gives us our first set for the base of the arms on this. You're going to notice my curve is perfectly centered. You want to measure, make sure that your saw blade goes right down to where it curves right in the middle. You got to know your saw to do that. It takes a little bit of scrap wood testing. I suggest you do that. If you want to make this to where it comes apart, you're not going to want to use the glue. But if you're going to make it permanent to sit in your backyard, you definitely want to use some wood glue. So you just put a good amount in there, and you're going to push these two pieces together. The reason that I like them not going all the way down perfect is that this actually lifts up just a touch when you set it on the table. If you go perfectly flat, it's hard to get them flushed up. You want to take a 1/8 inch drill bit and go right down the center. You can measure and be a perfectionist. You want to stop right about there. Once you feel it punch through that first piece, because if you go all the way through, it's not going to lock in. So we're using a 1.5 inch wood screw, coarse. I'm stripping that hole out a little bit, pushing down hard, finishing it. Those are together. They're not going anywhere. Because they're nice and tight there, they're not going to wobble back and forth. If you leave too much of a space here, if you overcut it, if you go outside those black lines, it's going to be wobbly. If you do have that and you still want to work with it, just put a couple more holes there and a couple screws that lock it in place. Once the glue settles, you'll be good to go. We're going to check this and see how close to a right angle we are. It's perfect. Fits right in there. And because one is good, they're all going to be good. So we have done this pretty much exact as you can get. This next technique is my favorite because it allows you to get pretty close to 8 pieces being almost even with each other. It's a little bit high. Well, it's actually that much higher. This works for wind turbines. A lot of people ask me, I did a video on how to make wind turbines that work really good out of wood, 2x4s. They last a really long time. They don't warp, they don't do anything. You can make 8 blades by using this method. 2 of these and put them together because they'll be chopped up on top of each other. You can do that. That's a shortcut, okay? You can make another one, just stitch it right down and you've got 8 arms. It'll still work because you're focusing the mirrors manually, but it doesn't look really good. Well, it looks okay, but this is a stronger way of doing it. This to this wood is going to be a 45-degree cut. Take a ruler, and from your center point, you want to measure out 1 7/8 to one side, turn it around to the opposite side. We're going to do the same technique, but we're going to set our saw at 45 degrees. One thing that happens when you use a 45-degree cut or you change the angle, the depth that the saw blade comes into the wood changes because it's a longer cut. So I am pulling it closer. This is a 3/8 inch piece of wood. We're going to put it in there. We're going to line it up to our first line, and we're going to go down to there. We're going to come over and grab the other side. Chop saws aren't really designed to run for a really long time. You can burn the switches up and the motor, so you want to take a little break in between. So we cleaned out our first cut, and our curve is almost perfectly centered. It's a little bit favoring one side, not going to be a really big deal for us. Now that you have the first part set up, you can't just flip your wood, because if you do that, you're going to end up with the same. So you want to come back here and set your saw to 45, the opposite direction. One thing that happened, that little piece of wood flew right at me, so you definitely want to have eye protection. It hit my goggles. If I didn't have eye protection on, I would be in the house right now doctoring a hurt eye. So we now have a crisscross cut there that's going to drop right in there. If you did everything correctly, you should have a cut that looks like this, and it fits in there snugly. You want it to be tight. You don't want it to be too loose. Again, if you do happen to make it just a touch too loose, don't get too upset. So make sure that's nice and flush. This time, you want to go off center just a touch because you have a screw there in the center from before. So we're going to go off to this side. We're going to favor it. You don't want to split the wood out on the end. We're going to do 2. Since we're dealing with deeper wood, I'm going to use 2-inch wood screws. And that part's done. These, you now have 6. Now all you have to do is repeat that process one more time, and instead of going on the back side, the next one's going to come on the front side. This one's just a touch looser than the other one. I actually overcompensated, so you don't want to put it on top of this side so that they build. You want it to go here, on the opposite side. So you're going to have one on one side, one on the other side. Glued and screwed, done. Look at that. We're going to try to stand this one up. If you did everything correctly, you should have something that looks like this, and it should be able to stand up almost on its own. That lets you know that everything's nice and even. The next video in this series, I'm going to be showing you how to frame things. This is a mirror. It is a 12 by 12 mirror. You get 4 of them at IKEA for like $6. You can buy them just about anywhere. The frame is important because it gives the mirror some strength. Hard to break them. You can just glue a 2 by 4 down the center if you want to take a shortcut, but then you've got sharp edges sticking out. This looks a lot better. You do choke a little bit of the mirror's power by cropping it in. Once you watch the next video, we're going to get on to attaching these mirrors to this to allow us to put our pot in the middle and have a very powerful solar cooker. I'm your host, Dan Rojas. Thank you for watching, and enjoy our video. So in the event that this would, would, you use the wider block and go just to the inside of that line. If I'm plugged in, oh boy. Now that you've cleaned out your first part, all you do is flip your wood, keep your other stock the same. Oops.